All right, so I am going to share with you my experiences using podcasts, and it has become, here we go, see if that worked properly. All right, y'all have my podcast without, okay, perfect, thank you, or my, never mind, can't talk. So I have to start by telling you I am a literacy educator and I am a lifelong fan of old-time radio shows and audiobooks, and we lived in California when I was a kid and we drove all over the place and we listened to all of those things. So I have always been an avid listener of podcasts, but we called them old-time radio shows at the time. So I love this resurgence that we've seen. And so I've got lots of ideas for you, lots of resources for you, and I'm excited to share them. I'm also a semi-techie person, although yesterday when I tried to be techie, I failed miserably. So I've got a QR code so you can access my slides and probably more importantly, my podcast recommendations. So I've got like a whole blog post with all of my favorite podcasts and links to podcasts for various other areas that I don't know as much about. So I just found seemingly credible sources. And I've got, if I'm on top of things, I can even share it in the chat. Except my computer is, there we go. So you can have access to everything. So we are all tired of staring at our computer screens. While this conference is fantastic, it's another time that we are sitting at our computers and not moving, and Zoom fatigue is real. We are tired, we are worried, we are burnt out from the overuse of these virtual platforms for communication, and there's all of the other issues around computer visual syndrome, digital eye strain that results from prolonged computer, tablet, e-reader, cell phone use, et cetera. All of my links on the digital version are live. You can go to the places that I'm referencing. Our students are spending more time on Zoom, especially when you have fully remote students. They're completing more digital assignments, and a lot of them are buying ebooks because they're a lot cheaper, or they're accessing digital copies of articles. So not only are we spending more time on computers for class time, we are spending more time outside of class on computers as well. So why use podcasts? There are over 1,750,000 podcasts, and there are more than 43 million episodes available. Half of US homes have podcast fans in them. 55% of the US population has listened to a podcast. 37% listen to podcasts monthly. And this is the coolest part, especially for our universities. 48% of people aged 12 to 34 listen to podcasts. And so this is a medium they're already familiar with. It's something they're already excited about. And in general, they're just fantastic. So the benefits of podcasts are myriad. They are portable. They give you a break from the screen. And talking about issues of equity, there's way less bandwidth for video content. So my parents live in rural Southern Illinois. The fastest internet they can pay for at $75 a month is 6 megabits per second, however that goes. And the lowest speed I can get here outside Columbus is 100. So there is a huge difference in video content versus audio only content. So that also is a benefit to podcasts. They're way more engaging than traditional readings. They're more easily accessible for students with disabilities. As much as 15 to 20% of our population has dyslexia or some other reading challenges. And so providing audio opportunities to engage with content is really powerful. And it also gives us access to experts in the field. I know my content area. I can talk all day about literacy and writing and reading, but I am not Louisa Moats or the giants in the field. And so giving students the opportunity to hear directly from the best of the best and to engage with meaningful content in another way gets them more excited. And then again, I'm a literacy person, so I have to share that the engagement factor is huge, and the opportunity to hear that terminology, to hear that vocabulary is different than a traditional lecture, a traditional textbook reading. I'm sure you've all read something where there was a word you didn't know, and then you go to class and you're like, oh, I'm not sure how to say that word. And so this gives people better access to the content in different ways. Okay, so we'll see if this works. I think I have to change the way I'm sharing. I've got an audio file. Oh, wait, no, I think it'll. So I have an audio file from Freakonomics Radio just to give you a snippet of how powerful these types of programs can be. Let's do it this way. I have to make sure that I am sharing. I don't think I'm sharing my computer audio, so give me 1 second. There we go. So this audio clip is from Angela Duckworth, who's the author of Grit. And then it has like the, Freakonomics Radio, if you listen to it, dun, 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 dun. Okay. It is one of my favorite podcasts, and it covers everything from economics to education to social justice to everything in between. So here is just a quick clip so you can hear the high quality audio productions that you can get from podcasts.
You talk about changing character or changing grit. It feels like, well, you can't change that. But when you actually get to the specifics,
Okay, so if you go to my,
what specifically are gritty people like?
Okay.
What do they do when they wake up in the morning? What beliefs do gritty people walk around with in their heads? When you get to that level of specifics, you realize, gosh, there's no reason why these things couldn't be taught, practiced, or learned.
Duckworth has learned what she's learned about grit in two main ways. One, by conducting in-depth interviews with high achievers, business people, athletes, musicians, and so on. Paragons of grit, she calls them. And two, by following groups of people, like new cadets at West Point or students in the Chicago public schools, and seeing whether a person's long-term success corresponds to their grit score. We'll hear later how she calculates that score. Through her research, Duckworth has identified 4 traits that gritty people have in abundance: interest, practice, purpose, and hope.
Let's start with the first thing I think that gritty people develop in the order in which they develop it, which is interest. So one thing that I found about paragons of grit, real outliers in passion and perseverance, is that they have extremely well-developed interests. They cultivate something which grabs their attention initially, but that they become familiar with enough, knowledgeable enough that they wake up the next day and the next day and the next year, and they're still interested in this thing. And I think that is something that we can actually intentionally decide. I want to be the kind of person who stays interested in something. And so that passion really does have to come first. They wake up in the morning. What beliefs do gritty people walk around with in their heads? When you get to that level of specifics, you realize, gosh, there's no reason why these things couldn't be. You talk about changing character or...
All right. Did it stop now? Okay. Sorry, y'all. I have no idea what's going on. But Angela Duckworth, this is her life's work. This is a well-produced podcast. Stephen Dubner is an excellent host. And so students are way more excited about listening to a podcast than they are about a traditional textbook chapter or article. So how can you use them? You can use them in place of traditional readings. You can use them to accompany traditional readings. You can play segments to discuss in class, to spark discussion. Now, there are real accessibility concerns. So we know that we have students that have hearing loss or auditory processing challenges. So one thing you want to make sure that you do is anytime you choose a podcast, that there is either a transcription available or text that follows along with it, so that covers the same material so that everyone has access to it. And so I've just got like a little that snippet that we just listened to from the Freakonomics site. Most podcasts have some digital content, so you just have to be choosy. So pay attention. Here is where I failed. So the first time I assigned a podcast, maybe half of my students listened to it. It was one of those weeks that everybody was kind of wrung out. And then they came to class and they didn't remember it anyway. If you have a traditional reading, if students are bringing their papers in, they have highlighted it, they have notes, hopefully. And with a podcast, you can't access it as easily, especially if it's a digital text that they can go back to review. So you need to have some kind of follow-up activity, guiding questions, podcast reflection, discussion board post, whatever it is, you just want a way for what they just listened to stick. So what I do for most of my podcasts that I have my students listen to is I use guiding questions. So I help students focus on the most important ideas from the podcast, collect lists of new and unfamiliar vocabulary terms. Again, I'm a literacy person, but I want that academic language to stick. It helps them learn the language of the field and encourages them to reflect on what they've learned. So my template is pretty easy. I always have a word bank, list any new or unfamiliar terms here. I use that to start my discussion in class. Ask a few specific questions about the content of the podcast. So that's where I reflect on what do I want them to take away, and I ask questions that get them there. And then I always end with write a sentence or two about your big takeaway from this podcast or one aha moment. In my classes, they've written their podcast responses. They can open those back up, and then we break into small groups and use those responses to build their discussions from. And what has happened is they are more engaged in discussions. They have a deeper understanding of the content. I hear them use the academic language more appropriately. Because sometimes when they read it out of a textbook, they don't quite know how to use it in conversation. And the conversational nature of podcasts makes that much easier for them. And again, they're excited to hear from the experts of the field. So where do you want to start? You want to start by listening to podcasts about your content area. I have a running list of episodes that I want to add to my classes from my favorite podcasts. You want to check out the list of podcasts and podcast lists that I've shared with you. You want to ask colleagues. If you're in any Facebook groups or other online groups for your content area, ask people. They will have recommendations for you. And finally, Google it. I was looking for some resources on effective questioning, and this fantastic resource came up about effective questioning in schools. And it's some guy that I've never heard of from the UK, but he gave this fantastic interview to some woman in Australia. My students loved it. First of all, it was awesome. We had an Australian and a guy from England talking, so that was pretty engaging. But it was a really great synthesis of what we know about effective questioning, and so it stuck better. You can also speed it up. You can listen to podcasts at faster speeds. If you want to review the podcast you shared with your students quickly, you can listen to it at 1.25 or 1.5 speed, and you can be ready for class. So quickly, I'm going to go over a couple of my favorite podcasts. All of this is available on that blog post that I mentioned. I love Freakonomics. I've used the Bad Medicine series to talk about conducting ethical research, the importance of study design in an action research course. There are tons of episodes that cover economics, psychology, education, history, ethics, current issues in American society, and everything has full transcripts. If you're a literacy person, the Science of Reading podcast is fantastic. It has an interview with my mentor talking about the importance of vocabulary and comprehension instruction across the content areas. Even if you're not in education, it has ideas. That particular one has ideas for you. Cult of Pedagogy has tons of great ideas to improve your teaching. I use that across all of my courses. And then, go back. This is my secret favorite podcast I've ever listened to. And so I have to tell everyone I ever have met about it. So 99% Invisible is about architecture and how architecture impacts our life and we don't even think about it. So there are 2 episodes about the California wildfires from I think 2 summers ago called Built to Burn and Fire and Rain. I learned more in those 2 episodes than I have from any other podcast ever. So if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this, go listen to these. And then 2 more really good ones. 1619 is the audio series from the New York Times about how slavery transformed America. Nice White Parents looks at the relationship between white parents and the public school down the street. Really good stuff. All right, and I'll stop.